Sometimes the smallest moments begin on the most ordinary days. Nothing feels staged. Nothing feels important yet. It starts with a quiet street, soft daylight, and a man walking without an audience, without a plan to be noticed. He is just moving through the world like everyone else. He had stepped out of his routine that morning, choosing to walk instead of being driven. The city moved fast around him, cars rushing, people lost in their own worries. He blended in easily, dressed simply, head slightly down, as if he wanted the day to pass without leaving a mark. But kindness rarely asks for permission. It shows up when you least expect it. Across the street, someone stood frozen near a bus stop. Not dramatic, not loud, just still. A quiet kind of panic lived in their posture. They clutched something close to their chest, eyes scanning faces that never slowed. Everyone passed. Everyone looked away. He noticed. He slowed his steps without thinking. That instinct came from somewhere deep, shaped by loss, by humility, by knowing how heavy life can feel when no one stops. He crossed the street, ignoring the honks behind him, ignoring the clock in his mind. In that moment, being on time stopped mattering. When he reached them, he spoke softly, like he did not want to scare the fragile courage holding them together. What followed was not dramatic. No cameras, no speeches, just presence, just listening, just choosing one human over everything else waiting for him. But as he stood there, the person's hands began to shake, and the truth they were about to share carried a weight he did not expect. The words came out slowly, as if each one had to push past years of silence. The person explained they had just left a hospital across town. Not for themselves, but for someone they loved. The kind of visit where doctors avoid eye contact and speak in careful sentences. The kind that leaves you standing outside afterward, unsure where to go next. He listened without interrupting. His face stayed calm, but something tightened in his chest. He knew that feeling, the helplessness. The way the world keeps moving while your own life feels paused. He did not offer comfort right away. He let the space exist because sometimes that is the only thing that helps. The person admitted they had missed their bus. Not because they were late, but because they could not make their legs move when it arrived. They had nowhere urgent to be, yet nowhere safe to stay either. Saying it out loud seemed to break something inside them. Their voice cracked, and they looked down, embarrassed by their own need. He gently asked where they were going. When they answered, he realized it would take hours by public transport. He checked the time once, then slid his phone back into his pocket. Whatever was planned next quietly disappeared. He suggested they sit, just for a moment, on the cold bench beside them. That small decision slowed the world enough for the person to breathe again. What they did not know was that by choosing to sit, he was about to change more than just their afternoon. Because the next choice he made would place him in the middle of a promise he had never planned to keep. They sat side by side on the bench, the city breathing around them. Footsteps passed. Conversations drifted in and out like background noise. For a moment it almost felt normal, almost peaceful. But the stillness carried a fragile tension, like glass that could crack with the wrong movement. He asked careful questions, not prying, just enough to understand. The person told him about their sister. Younger, bright in the way people are when they believe life will eventually be kind to them. A sudden illness, weeks that blurred together, hospital rooms that smelled like disinfectant and fear, a doctor who finally said the words that rearrange your entire future without warning. They had been the strong one, the calm one, the one who promised everything would be okay even when they did not believe it. That morning after leaving the hospital, the weight finally caught up. Their body had stopped obeying their mind. Standing still felt safer than moving forward. He nodded slowly. He did not try to fix the story. He did not interrupt it with optimism. He had learned long ago that pain does not need to be corrected. It needs to be witnessed. After a pause, he asked if they had eaten. The question surprised them. They shook their head, almost apologetic, as if hunger were another failure. He stood up and gestured toward a small cafe across the street. Nothing fancy, just a place with warm light and quiet corners. Inside, the cafe smelled like coffee and bread. The hum of conversation was soft, respectful. They chose a table near the window. He ordered without asking too many questions, reading the situation the way you read weather. Something warm, something grounding. When the food arrived, the person stared at it for a moment before taking the first bite. Their hands trembled less. Their shoulders lowered. It was not happiness, but it was relief. The kind that arrives when your body realizes it might survive the next hour. As they ate, he shared something of his own. Not details, not names, just the truth that he had lost people too. That grief does not move in straight lines. That strength is often mistaken for silence. His voice stayed even, but his eyes carried the memory of storms already lived through. They looked at him differently then, not with recognition, not with awe, just with a quiet trust that forms when two strangers realize they speak the same emotional language. After the meal, he paid and stood. Outside, the sky had shifted. Clouds rolled in, thick and heavy, as if the city itself sensed the weight of the conversation. He asked again where they needed to go. This time, his tone carried intention. They hesitated before answering. The address was not just far, it was complicated. A place filled with decisions they were not ready to make yet. Saying it out loud felt like opening a door they wanted to keep closed. He did not hesitate. He offered to take them. Not halfway, not to the nearest stop, all the way. The person protested immediately. They shook their head, embarrassed, insisting they would manage. They did not want to be a burden. They did not want to take more than had already been given. But he stood firm in a gentle way, not forceful, certain. Sometimes help arrives only once, he said, and sometimes you have to let it in. They walked together to his car. It was parked a few blocks away, nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. Inside, the space felt quiet and safe. The city noise softened as the doors closed. For the first time that day, the person leaned back and let themselves rest. As they drove, rain began to fall. Light at first, then heavier, tapping against the windshield like nervous fingers. Traffic slowed. The world narrowed to the road ahead and the soft rhythm of movement. Minutes passed in silence, not awkward, needed. Then the person spoke again. They admitted they were afraid of what would happen next, afraid of being strong when they had nothing left, afraid of failing the person they loved. The words spilled out faster now, no longer trapped behind pride. He listened, hands steady on the wheel. He told them something simple. That love is not measured by outcomes. That showing up counts, even when the ending is uncertain. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. They reached a stoplight. Red. The rain intensified, blurring the city into streaks of color. He glanced at them briefly, then back to the road. He said he believed they were already doing enough. The words landed harder than expected. The person's eyes filled and they turned toward the window, trying to hide it. He did not call attention to the tears. He respected them. As they got closer to the address, the tension returned. The building appeared at the end of the street, tall and quiet, its windows reflecting the gray sky. This was where decisions lived, where waiting turned into reality. He pulled over and parked. The engine hummed softly before he turned it off. Neither of them moved right away. The person thanked him. Once. Then again, more urgently, as if words might somehow balance the weight of what they had received. He waved it off gently, saying it was nothing. But it was not nothing. Before they opened the door, he reached into his jacket and handed them a small piece of paper. A phone number, written by hand. In case you need someone to talk to, he said. No pressure. They stared at the paper, then back at him. Something shifted in their expression. Gratitude mixed with disbelief, hope mixed with fear. They stepped out into the rain and walked toward the building. Halfway there, they turned around. He was still sitting in the car, watching to make sure they got inside safely. They raised a hand in thanks. He nodded once, then started the engine and drove away. What neither of them knew was that the person they had just helped would face a moment later that night, where everything would nearly fall apart again. And the number on that piece of paper would become the difference between giving up and holding on. Night arrived quietly, the way it often does after a long, emotional day. Inside the building, the lights were dim, and the hallways smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old paper. The person stood still for a moment after the door closed behind them, hand resting on the cool metal handle, heart beating faster than it should. The calm from the drive had already begun to fade. Upstairs, the room felt smaller than before. The silence pressed in. A chair sat untouched near the window. A bag lay open on the floor, half-packed, abandoned hours earlier when the weight of decisions became too heavy to carry. They set their keys down carefully, as if loud sounds might shatter whatever fragile balance remained. Their phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Just a few words, polite, professional, urgent. They read it once, then again. Then a third time, hoping the meaning might change. It did not. The request was simple and devastating. Come back tonight, as soon as possible. The room tilted slightly. They sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the mattress to steady themselves. This was the moment they had been bracing for all day, the one they were not ready to face. The promise they had made to stay strong suddenly felt impossible. They thought of the bus stop, the bench, the warmth of the cafe, the calm voice that had told them they were already doing enough. For a brief second, they considered pretending the message had not arrived yet. Just one more hour of peace, just one more breath. But love does not allow delays. They stood, pulled on their jacket, and reached for their phone again. Their thumb hovered over the screen. The piece of paper rested on the table beside the door, folded once, the ink slightly smudged from the rain. They had told themselves they would never use it, that it was just a kind gesture, nothing more. Their hands shook as they unfolded it. They hesitated. What would they even say? How do you call someone you barely know in the middle of the night and admit that you are breaking? The thought felt embarrassing, weak, unfair. The phone buzzed again. Another message, shorter this time, more serious. That decided it. They dialed the number. It rang twice, 3 times. Each ring tightened the knot in their chest. On the fourth, a voice answered. Calm, familiar, slightly tired, but warm. Hey, he said. The sound of it was enough. Their voice collapsed before they could form a sentence. The words came out tangled, soaked in panic. They apologized immediately for calling, for crying, for needing something they could not explain. He did not interrupt. He let the storm pass. When they finally slowed, he asked where they were. They told him. He asked what happened. They told him that too. Their sister's condition had changed. The doctors were concerned. Tonight mattered. He listened, then spoke with quiet certainty. He told them to breathe, slowly, in and out, one breath at a time. He stayed with them through it, counting softly, grounding them back into their body. Then he said something unexpected. I can take you. They protested again, harder this time. It was late, it was far, he had already done enough. But he was already standing, already reaching for his keys. His voice left no room for argument, only reassurance. I meant it when I gave you that number. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the rain outside the building. They watched from the window, disbelief mixing with gratitude and fear. When they stepped outside, the night air was cold and sharp, but the sight of him waiting there steadied them. The drive to the hospital felt longer this time. The rain came down harder, the roads slick and shining under streetlights. Inside the car, the air was quiet, heavy with unspoken truths. They clenched their hands together, trying to prepare for what waited ahead. He did not fill the silence with advice. He simply stayed present. At one point, he reached over and placed his hand gently over theirs, grounding without asking permission. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of understanding. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Nurses spoke quickly. Forms appeared, doors opened and closed. The person was guided down familiar hallways that suddenly felt foreign again. He stayed back when needed, stepped forward when invited, always careful not to take space that was not his. They waited. Time stretched. Minutes turned into something heavier. The sound of machines hummed behind closed doors. Other families whispered nearby, their faces mirrors of the same fear. Finally, a doctor approached. The words came carefully. The situation was serious, critical. There were decisions to be made soon. The person nodded, absorbing information while their heart threatened to break open. They asked the questions they were supposed to ask, signed where they were told, agreed to things they barely understood. When the doctor left, the weight crashed down all at once. They stood abruptly, pacing, hands in their hair, breath shallow. This was too much. The strength they had been borrowing all day was gone. They turned away, afraid they might fall apart in front of him. But he stepped closer. He did not try to stop the tears. He did not tell them everything would be okay. He simply stood there, solid, unmovable, a quiet anchor in the middle of the storm. When their knees gave, he caught them, guiding them gently into a chair. "You are not alone in this," he said softly. The words hit something deep. Hours passed in fragments, updates, waiting, more silence. At some point near dawn, the person was allowed to see their sister briefly. Tubes, monitors, a stillness that felt unnatural. They held her hand, whispered promises they did not know how to keep, and stepped back out with a heart that felt permanently changed. Outside the room, they leaned against the wall, exhausted beyond words. He was still there, had not left, had not checked his phone, had not rushed away. "Why are you still here?" they asked quietly. He answered without hesitation, "Because this matters." Just before sunrise, another doctor arrived. The news was not good, not final, but close. The next few hours would decide everything. The person felt the world narrow to a single point. This was the edge, the place where hope and heartbreak stood face to face. They closed their eyes, pressing their forehead against the wall, fighting the urge to disappear. Behind them, he took a slow breath. "Whatever happens," he said gently, "you showed up. That counts more than you know." They turned toward him, tears streaming freely now. In that moment, they realized something terrifying and beautiful. This stranger had become the reason they were still standing. And the decision waiting just ahead would test not only their strength, but his as well. Morning light crept into the hospital through narrow windows, pale and uncertain, as if even the sun did not know how brave it was allowed to be. The hallway looked different at dawn, quieter, softer. The chaos of the night had thinned into a fragile calm that felt almost dishonest. The person sat curled into themselves in a plastic chair, jacket wrapped tight, eyes swollen from crying they could no longer stop. Their body ached in places they did not know could hurt. Every muscle felt heavy, every breath like it had to be earned. He sat beside them, still awake, posture relaxed but alert, as if he had trained himself long ago to stay steady when everything else collapsed. He had not slept. He had not complained. He had not left. A nurse approached with gentle steps. She spoke their name softly, the way people do when they already know the weight of what comes next. There was an update, not an answer, just movement, just change. The doctors were preparing for an emergency procedure. The words echoed inside their head without landing properly. Emergency meant risk. It meant consent forms. It meant outcomes no one could promise. Their hands began to shake again, uncontrollable now, as fear surged through them with renewed force. They were handed a clipboard, pages filled with language that felt distant and cold. The nurse explained as kindly as she could, pointing to places to sign, explaining timeframes and possibilities. The person nodded automatically, but their vision blurred. The pen felt too heavy. They froze. This was the moment they had been avoiding. The moment where love demanded a decision, not just presence. The moment where choosing meant accepting responsibility for whatever came next. They could not move. He noticed immediately. He leaned closer, his voice low, private. He did not tell them what to do. He did not tell them it would be okay. He simply reminded them that they were allowed to take a breath. One, just one. They inhaled shakily, then again. The pen touched paper. Their signature looked unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone older, someone who had crossed an invisible line. When they handed the clipboard back, their hands were numb. The nurse thanked them and disappeared behind swinging doors. And then there was nothing to do but wait. They paced the hallway, steps uneven, mind spiraling. Every memory of their sister flooded in at once. Childhood laughter, fights that never lasted, promises made in quiet moments that suddenly felt fragile and unfinished. They stopped walking and pressed their forehead against the wall again, this time unable to hold back the sob that tore through them. It was raw and uncontrolled, the sound of someone reaching the edge of what they could carry. He stood and wrapped his arms around them without hesitation. They did not resist. For the first time since everything began, they let themselves lean fully into another human being. Their weight sagged against his chest as the grief poured out, messy and loud and unfiltered. He held them firmly, not afraid of the intensity, not trying to quiet it. He had learned something important in life. That pain shrinks when it is not faced alone. Time blurred after that. They did not know how long they stood there. Minutes, maybe longer. Eventually, the tears slowed, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that felt almost peaceful by comparison. They pulled back, embarrassed by how much they had revealed. He met their eyes with nothing but respect. No pity, no discomfort, just understanding. "You are doing this out of love," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, remember that." The hours dragged on. Doctors passed without stopping. Nurses moved quickly, focused, efficient. The world outside the hospital woke up, unaware of the silent battle unfolding inside these walls. At some point, he went to get coffee. He returned with 2 cups, setting one gently into their hands. It was warm, solid, real. They had not realized how cold they were until then. They watched steam rise from the cup, grounding themselves in something simple. For a few minutes, they talked about nothing important. A memory of a place they both loved. A story about someone kind they once met. Small human moments stitched into the waiting, keeping them from unraveling completely. Then a doctor appeared. This one moved slower. Their heart dropped instantly. The doctor asked them to step into a private room. The door closed behind them with a final sound that echoed too loudly. The air inside felt thick, charged with meaning. The doctor spoke carefully, choosing each word as if it mattered. The procedure was underway. There had been complications. It was too early to know the outcome. The next update would come soon. Soon was a cruel word. The person nodded, absorbing the information in fragments. They asked one question, then another, trying to sound composed while everything inside them screamed. The doctor answered patiently, then excused himself. The room felt unbearably small. They sank into a chair, hands gripping their knees, breath shallow again. This was the longest stretch of waiting yet. This was the space where hope and fear wrestled without rules. They looked up at him suddenly. "What if I made the wrong choice?" they asked. "What if this makes things worse?" He did not answer right away. He sat across from them, eyes steady. Then he spoke with quiet conviction. "You made the best choice you could with the information you had. That is all any of us can do." The words did not erase the fear, but they softened its edge. Minutes passed. Then footsteps approached the door. He had opened. The doctor returned, expression unreadable. The person's heart pounded so hard they thought they might faint. They braced themselves for words they did not want to hear, preparing to absorb something that would permanently change their life. The doctor took a breath. Before he could speak, an alarm sounded somewhere down the hall. Urgent, sharp, the kind of sound that cuts through everything else. The doctor's eyes shifted. "Excuse me," he said quickly, already turning toward the door. The door closed again, leaving them alone in the room, suspended in unbearable uncertainty. The person looked at him, panic rising fast. Their hands began to shake again, harder this time. This interruption felt like torture, like being held on the edge of a cliff without knowing which way they would fall. He reached across the small space and took their hands firmly in his. "Look at me," he said softly. They did. "Whatever happens next," he continued, "I want you to know something. You are not weak for feeling this. You are human, and you did not face this alone." Before they could respond, a nurse burst into the room, breathless. She looked directly at them and said their name. Everything inside them went still. The next words she spoke would change everything. The nurse's face softened before she spoke, and in that small detail the person felt something shift. Not relief yet, not joy, just movement, just change. She explained slowly, carefully, as if every word mattered. The procedure had been difficult. There were moments when the outcome was uncertain, but the worst part was over. Their sister was stable, not healed, not safe yet, but alive, breathing, still here. The person did not react right away. Their mind lagged behind the words, struggling to trust them. Stable echoed inside their chest, strange and fragile, like a gift they were afraid to touch. When it finally landed, their body responded before their thoughts could catch up. They cried. Not the sharp, panicked crying from before. This was different, heavy, relieving. The kind that comes when something you were bracing to lose stays just a little longer. Their knees gave out and they sank back into the chair, covering their face as the sobs came in waves. He moved to their side instantly. He did not speak. He did not need to. He rested one hand on their back, steady and grounding, letting them release everything they had been holding since that first moment at the bus stop. This was the sound of survival, of fear loosening its grip. The nurse stayed a moment longer, offering details about what would happen next. Monitoring, time, cautious hope. Then she left them alone again, closing the door gently behind her. The room felt different now, still heavy but no longer crushing. The air moved more easily. The walls no longer seemed to lean inward. They wiped their face, embarrassed again by how much emotion had spilled out. He met their eyes with a soft smile, the kind that carried exhaustion and relief at the same time. "You did that," he said quietly. They shook their head immediately. "No," they said, "I almost fell apart." He shook his head back. "You stayed. That is not falling apart." A few hours later, they were allowed to see their sister again. This time, the machines sounded less threatening. The monitors glowed steadily. There was color in her face, a faint squeeze of the hand when they spoke her name. The person leaned close and whispered everything they had been holding in. Promises, gratitude, love. They stayed longer this time, no longer afraid that every second might be the last. When they stepped back into the hallway, the sun was fully up now, flooding the space with soft light. Nurses moved with calm efficiency. Life continued. Only then did reality catch up. They turned toward him, suddenly aware of how much time had passed, of how much he had given, of the fact that he had stayed through the night for someone he barely knew. "You should go," they said quietly. "You must be exhausted." He smiled again, small and tired. A little, he admitted. They hesitated, then spoke the question that had been sitting between them since the beginning. "Why did you stop that day?" He thought for a moment before answering. Then he said something simple. "Because I know what it feels like to need someone and see no one slowing down." They walked outside together. The city looked different in daylight, softer, kinder. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving the air fresh and bright. At his car, they stopped. This time, the goodbye felt heavier, not because of sadness, but because of meaning. Some people pass through your life quickly and still leave a permanent mark. They thanked him again, this time without urgency, without desperation. Just honest gratitude, the kind that does not rush. He nodded, then surprised them by pulling them into a brief hug. It was not dramatic, not long, just enough to say what words could not. "Take care of yourself too," he said. Then he got into his car and drove away, disappearing back into the flow of the city the same way he had appeared. Quietly, without needing credit. Days passed. Then weeks. Their sister recovered slowly. There were setbacks. There were hard days, but there was progress. Life reshaped itself around a new understanding of what mattered. Sometimes, when the hospital room was quiet at night, the person thought back to that bench, that cafe, that moment when one stranger chose to stop. They texted him once, weeks later, just a short message. "She is getting better, thank you for everything." His reply came quickly, "I am glad you are both still here." They never met again. But every time the person found themselves rushing past someone in need, every time they noticed a quiet struggle in a crowded place, they remembered what one choice had done for them. And sometimes they stopped. Because kindness does not need an audience. It just needs one person willing to step out of their way.